The privilege that I have of knowing Chris and now being in a position to say that he's a friend and an ally at MDI is more than I can possibly imagine to say. So Chris, please come up.
Thank you, MDI. Thank you, family of women. It is a privilege and an honor to speak with you tonight at this wonderful gathering. I also want to take a second to thank Jim Ellis and Jennifer Geronimo. They're the ones who actually first reached out and contacted me. They saw me speak at a conference in San Diego not too long ago and said, "You've got to come to Las Vegas." I said, "Okay, I'll come to Vegas, sure." I'm just beginning to learn about MDI and Family of Women. I've been on a call with the End Abuse team. As Charles mentioned, I had the privilege of chatting with him this afternoon. And I have to say, I'm really impressed with what I'm seeing. I think Charles's vision for the organization and the goal of ending abuse is a noble and a just one. And I'm convinced that working together, we can actually do this. Now, I'd like to talk to you tonight about some very sobering facts about abuse, both sexual and otherwise. But if I accomplish my charge, you will leave here tonight reinvigorated and motivated to action. Now, I'm going to end tonight with a couple of simple and easy things every single one of us in this room can do to make a difference and to really start making a change. Now, that may sound like a tall order, but since we're in Vegas and this is the land of going over the top and spectacle, I'm going to make it just a little bit harder for myself. So I want to start by saying something that's likely going to upset some of you. Look around the room. Seated in this room tonight are probably a couple of dozen potential mass murderers. Recently, Erica Christakis, an early childhood educator, public health advocate, and Harvard College administrator, wrote an article in Time titled "The Overwhelming Maleness of Mass Homicide." In the article, she wrote, quote, "We know that the young men who go on murderous rampages are not always sociopathic monsters, but rather sometimes more or less regular men who suffered from crushing depression and suicidal ideation." I realized immediately that I fit Ms. Christakis' description of a potential mass murderer to a T. And I'm willing to bet I'm not the only man in this room who does. As a matter of fact, some of you who fall into that category with me might even be more of a risk because you actually own a gun. I happen to live in New York City, and if there's one thing Bloomberg hates more than guns, hates more than soda, it's guns. Messed that line. Now, at this point, I suppose it's only polite that I share a little bit more about myself so that you have some sense of what gives me the right to waltz in here and accuse some of you of potentially being mass murderers. As Charles mentioned, I am the executive director of an organization called Male Survivor, which advocates and provides hope, healing, and support to male survivors of sexual abuse and their loved ones. I've battled crushing depression. I've come from a long line of alcoholics and overindulged myself once or twice, maybe once or twice more too. When I was 2 years old, I remember clearly having a temper tantrum in the kitchen of my house and falling silent as my mother out-tantrumed me. I was placed in a therapy group at the county mental hospital when I was 5 years old because I had wild emotional swings at school that endangered the other students and frightened my teachers. In my home, shouting in anger was the norm. I don't ever remember my parents telling me that they loved me, let alone each other. My father died when I was 19, having never taken the steps that could have prevented him from losing his eyesight to diabetes over the last 2 years of his life. I too have battled suicidal thoughts, often. Oh, and just in case that wasn't enough, I was sexually abused when I was 8 years old. Now, Jim and Charles told me that my task was to inspire you, and I'm guessing right now I'm not doing such a great job of that. But I'm sharing all of this for an important reason. In this room of a few hundred people, I know that I'm not the only one who has a story like this to tell. So now that I've told you who I was, I'd like to tell you who I am. And it might shock you to hear this, but I actually don't like talking about myself very much. The reason I'm actually about to share these things with you is not because I want to brag, but because I want to make a point, that it is possible to heal. Today, I am the executive director of a nonprofit called Male Survivor, as you already know. We are the preeminent organization providing hope, healing, and support to male survivors of sexual abuse and their loved ones. My work takes me all across the country to do community raising awareness events and to provide trainings to social workers, clinicians, and to others who work with our population. I was at the Sandusky trial this summer and at the sentencing earlier this week. Before I became the executive director, I briefly attended law school on an academic scholarship. As an undergraduate, I studied philosophy and wrote my thesis on Hegel. But lest you think I'm some ivory tower show-off, between my undergrad days and returning to law school recently, I spent 15 years working in the theatrical industry as a stagehand, both on Broadway and doing special event work all over the country. And although my first marriage died a spectacular death, I am happily remarried to the love of my life and to the most amazing woman. Not that there's anything wrong with that. To the most amazing woman a man could ever have the luck to know. And I apologize, ladies, no offense intended to any of you, but I am biased. So what happened? How did I get from the darkest depths of depression and wanting to kill myself to standing here before you and flubbing a couple of really awful jokes? I think there are three elements to a healthy life, three things that we need to be able to transform the darkness into light: hope, healing, and support. I'll briefly touch on each of these three elements of recovery as I call them. Hope. Hope in the context of recovery means the sense that a victim can see the real possibility that recovery is possible. In order to have hope, we have to know that we are not alone. There are some postcards in the back of the room, and some of you may have heard the statistics recently, especially with all the attention focused on this topic from the Sandusky scandal. 1 in 6 males and 1 in 4 females are sexually abused before the age of 16. For every 100 friends you have on Facebook, at least 15 to 20 of them are survivors of sexual abuse. For years, I labored under the assumption that what was done to me in that grungy, musty bedroom was a singular and unusual experience. I assumed that something was forever broken in me by that experience, and that I could not share it because no one would understand. But as we are finally beginning to learn, there are tens of millions of other men in the US alone who have been sexually abused. Most of us struggle for years in shame, silence, and stigma because we have no reason to hope for recovery. We merely go through life trying to mask the pain as best we can, because after all, well, that's what a man does. We swallow our emotions, and we never, ever let anyone see our vulnerability. Because if we did, that could make us be seen as weak, and no man wants to be seen as weak. Support. No one can move from victim to survivor without support. For me, the greatest moment in my life occurred at a Male Survivor weekend of recovery. These weekends are amazing, transformative experiences. I walked into a room at the beginning of my first weekend, surrounded by 28 other guys who I'd never met before. Didn't know anybody's name, hadn't introduced myself, hadn't said a word to anybody. But I walked into that room, and it was the first time in my life I did not feel alone. In the recovery context, support means both professional support informed by the best science and practices, as well as personal support from peers, and when impossible, loved ones and family members. That's one of the reasons why I'm so excited to be speaking to you tonight and learning more about MDI and FOW and the work that you are all doing, because the peer groups that you have established and the support network that you are building and continuing to grow is a key part to building that support that enables people to heal. The last element, healing itself. Hope and support are akin to sunlight and rain. They are elements that we must take in from outside of ourself in order that we can grow. But the work of healing is on us. Healing in the context of recovery means that a victim must take an active participatory role in the healing process. When we are talking about deep emotional wounds, wounds to the spiritual self, these are not the sort of things that you can just slap a Band-Aid on and wait for things to get better. You can't just go see a therapist week after week after week and expect if I just talk, eventually it'll go away. When we talk about healing, we're talking about actually creating new neural pathways. We're talking about building a new sense of self. And it requires hard, hard work. And that's why we have to have plenty of sunlight and plenty of rain in order to be able to do that hard work. Why? Why do we need to do this? Well, we are learning more and more every day that the effects of trauma on our life, of all kinds of abuse, have drastic and dramatic implications for the quality of life and even the life expectancy of every single one of us. There's a study that's coming out called the ACEs study. It's the Adverse Childhood Experiences study. And I'm not going to show a bunch of slides and, get all technical. But suffice it to say, we finally are starting to have clear data that shows a correlation between traumatic experiences in childhood and a whole host of problems later in life. Depression, anxiety, suicidal behavior, substance abuse, alcohol abuse. For every single form of childhood trauma that somebody experiences, you see a straight line correlation. The more trauma, the more chance that you are going to go through a lot of pain later on in life. And it's common sense. We all, it seems obvious, but we'd never actually had the data to show that it really is true. The effects of abuse on our society are all around us. We live in a world where silence is considered golden, and the only time action is taken is after the damage is done. Sandusky, the Boy Scouts, the Catholic and Mormon churches, the Orthodox Jewish community, private schools and youth sporting programs. And let's remember, it's not just Sandusky's. There are thousands of stories of females abusing males. We just don't pay attention to them because we tell jokes that the 16-year-old who gets to go to bed with a, attractive teacher is lucky. Ask that kid 25 years later after he's had a string of failed relationships and probably a failed marriage or two, how lucky he feels. But in all of these scandals, one thing above all is the common thread. Secrecy and silence are the normal response to abuse. Children are sacrificed to the greater good of preserving an institution's image, as though the rape of a few kids can be offset by all the other good deeds that the pastor or priest does. I'm sure by now many of you are sick and tired of hearing me harp on about sexual abuse. Most of the men in the room are not survivors and of that kind of abuse, but I'm willing to bet that many of you have experienced at least some form of trauma. As I like to say, nobody gets to 30 unscathed in this world. But the secrecy that allows sexual abuse to thrive also allows all other kinds of abuse to thrive. Think about some of the great financial scandals of the past decade. Enron, Madoff, Lehman Brothers, the mortgage crisis. What ties them all together? Secrets, silence, and a sense that everything will be okay as long as we, don't don't look too far underneath the surface. It'll all work out. We all know pretty clearly how those stories turned out. And you don't have to have been embraced by Sandusky to feel the pain of any of these scandals. Every single one of us in this room, man or woman, has felt deeply the pain of abuse and trauma in our lives. And everyone here is looking for an answer. We are looking for healing, and we are looking for a way to break the cycle. So what do? How do we break the cycle? How can we change the game? I can't pretend to have all the answers, but I've got a couple of thoughts. I think one of the first things we absolutely have to do to fight this culture of secrecy is to create a culture of accountability and transparency. I know that's a big part of what everybody in this room stands for, and a big part of what MDI does. I was very close with an aunt of mine who died recently, and I'll always remember she used to say to me, she used to work for the Times, and she was a copy editor. She always hated my writing too. She said to me, Chris, this is before the internet became a big thing. You have to remember everything in this world that you put down on paper, everything that you type, you have to make sure that you want it known. You have to assume everything you say and everything you write will be known by the world, because eventually it can be. She was rather prescient about that, but I've always remembered that. So many places and so many areas, we don't think that way. I think everything we do, we should expect that it could be known by others. That's how we begin to hold ourselves accountable. The next suggestion I have, we need to start making a space for healing in our own lives. We can't expect to make a difference in helping other people heal if we're not making that space in our own lives. Self-care is extraordinarily important, but something that we often overlook. We need to be exercising, we need to be eating better, we need to be resting. We need to not try and do too much. We need to be kind to ourselves. There's no way we can be kind to others if we're not giving that gift to ourselves first. We need to recognize that vulnerability is actually the greatest strength that we have. I am not an indestructible force of nature, although sometimes I may drone on and pretend I am. I am a deeply flawed and hurting human being. Every day I struggle to accept the love of my wife and to be connected to those who are closest to me. And I'm okay with saying that because that's honest. And it's important to be honest. We need to know that abuse in all its forms is a far greater problem to our health and well-being than we have ever really believed, and that abuse does not discriminate. And if abuse doesn't discriminate, neither can we in our efforts to combat it. For all survivors of any kind of abuse, we also need to stress that it is absolutely possible to heal, so long as we get the support that we need and we are encouraged to have hope. We have the opportunity and the capability to do the hard work of healing. That each and every one of us has multiple opportunities every day to make things better or worse. Every day you have the opportunity to make things better. Some of us choose not to make a decision. Some of us choose not to try. And by choosing not to do so, we've made a choice to make them worse. But being good doesn't mean we have to be heroes. We don't have to fight every battle. We don't have to put it on our shoulders individually to end abuse in our lifetimes. Sometimes being good just means not doing anything bad and not doing something to make it worse on somebody else. How do we make things better? Well, like I said, I think one of the first things we need to do is to make a space for healing to occur in our lives and in the lives of those around us. How do we make it worse? When we act impulsively, when we're not paying attention to others around us, by thinking we're entitled to our bad behaviors or that it's somebody else's job to enforce the laws. So, What are you guys going to do tomorrow? When you walk out of here, when you get back on your planes and you go home, how are you going to remember what I've said tonight and all of the work that you've done this weekend? I have a couple of suggestions that I'd like you to think about trying. First and foremost, I would hope every single person in this room will give their support to MDI's End Abuse campaign. If you haven't gone on the website, if you haven't taken the pledge, please do so. Do so before you leave town. Do so before you go to bed tonight. Second thing, we need to find areas to build bridges. I've already reached out to Charles and to Jim. Male Survivor will support MDI, and I hope MDI will support Male Survivor. Also, the same with FOW. So many acronyms. There are far too many turf battles in this fight historically. We're all working to the same goal. We want to heal, and we want to help others heal. There's no reason we should be fighting each other just because one person may have a certain way of doing things. 3 deep breaths. We already know how to stop abuse in our own lives. In fact, we do it every day. It's called breathing. We just don't realize that there's actually a powerful way to breathe. Next time you feel really triggered, next time somebody cuts you off on the highway, or you just want to haul off and yell at somebody, please, just try and stop. Take 3 deep breaths. 3 deep breaths, that's all it takes to put yourself back in the moment and to stop yourself from hurting somebody else. Just try it. Learn how to listen, both to yourself and to all of the others around you. It's a tough skill, but the more we practice, the better we get. And the last point, take a stand for respect and respectful behavior. You know, we don't have to go out and tell people to, stop being an idiot all the time. But if somebody makes a joke about, a woman getting beat up or a kid getting sexually abused, you don't have to tell them they're wrong. You don't have to tell them they're an awful person. Just tell them you won't stand for it. Tell them that's not acceptable. That's all you need to say. I'm sorry, but that's not acceptable. Well, hopefully that'll be a good start. And if we can walk out of here feeling as though we're making a good start, then we've really done something. I want to thank you all again for your time. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you. Okay, stand right here. I think we want a picture.
I want to tell you that we're blessed to have Chris, and Chris has spoken to not only to communities like ours, like MDI and Family and Women, he's also addressed the U.S. Congress. He's an expert on this subject, and what he has to say is truly valuable and credible. So once again, thank you so much for being here. And you came out from New York, flew out on a red eye, going back tonight on another red eye. Man makes sacrifices for this cause. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.